that looks familiar. If you're a member of HRM, I'm speaking at their annual event. I have for, I think, the last 10 years, and this year I'm doing a pre-conference workshop and some general sessions, and so that picture is all over the place. And if you go to HRM Annual, I hope you'll see me there. What we're going to talk about this morning is delivering HR forms in the digital age and using web-based workflow, basically how you can go paperless with Sage HRMS. What I'm going to do is start with a little bit of an overview of what is Sage HRMS HR Actions. And we'll do that with just a few slides, not very many at all. And then we're just going to dive right in and look at software, come back and wrap up with a couple slides, and then, of course, time to take questions. Don't worry about writing everything down on the slides. If you really want a copy of them, Lauren will be happy to provide them. So let's start with a high-level overview of HR Actions. It is a Sage-endorsed product. That means it's like having the Sage version of the Good Housekeeping seal of approval. We work closely with Sage to make sure that the release is timed appropriately, that it works with new versions of HRMS that come out, and so on. It has been under development now for about 12, almost 13 years, as long as I've been here at Delphia Consulting, and we're the publishers of HR Actions. So when I started here, this was my job, was to come up with the architecture of this product. And what this really allows you to do is three things. First and foremost, use paperless forms. So employees and managers pick up forms over the web. You can do this with any browser. So we'll be using Internet Explorer today, but Chrome, Internet Explorer, and so on. You don't need to download an app. There's no client that you install anywhere. So you hit a website, and you pick up a form and fill it out. When you're all done, you click Initiate, and then the routing process begins. We also call that workflow. So we're going to email the first person on that digital routing slip, let them know they have something to review. They can look at it, and if they say yes, good to go, we'll email the next person on the routing slip, and we'll go right down to the end of the slip. The people who are approvers on that routing slip can be made up of managers, so you can walk the chain of command. Managers might have delegates assigned. Say they're away on vacation, they'll have someone who's covering for them. You can also have executives. You can have HR folks. You can even have named approvers. So you can put people in roles like I-9 auditor or training coordinator and so on. So all this is happening on that use side of the house. From an HR perspective, you're going to administer this application, and that means that you get to monitor all the forms that are in workflow at any time. So you can see everything that's out there and where it is on that routing slip. If you want, you can even kind of reach into the workflow, pick up one of the forms, look at it, and if you see something that needs fixed, you can fix it without interrupting that routing. So that means if you get a break and you want to look at a form, or you know there's a hot item out there that's in the process of being approved, you could go and look at it and make sure all the data on it is clean, so that you don't end up doing that after it's all done, once it hits HR. You can also control the workflow. You can skip an approver at any time. You could skip all the approvers and say, hey, we're done with this. You could even cancel the form. And when you're all done and happy with the form, one click updates Sage HRMS. So if there's any fields on that form that match fields in Sage HRMS, including custom details, then that click saves that. It takes that information from the form and puts it in just as though you typed it. Of course, it's stored, so you can always research and report on these things. You can always bring up the form in what we refer to as the online personnel file. So now you have a digital file cabinet with all the forms that have ever gone through your organization. In the last column, Build, this is where you can make new forms. There's no limit to how many forms you have with HR Actions. It's unlimited. I have some clients that have several hundred forms out there. You create forms without any programming. It's all done over the web, point and click, if you will. And when you build a form, you can pretty much put any of the fields that are in HRMS, including custom details. The only exceptions are benefits. We're not really intended to do, say, open enrollment types of forms. There's a separate module that does that. But any of the other HRMS fields, including custom details and payroll, can go on a form. If you want to put fields on a form that you don't want to track in HRMS, maybe you're doing a quick employee survey. Where do you want to go for the holiday function, the zoo or the comedy club? You could make a little form that people could fill out and have it go right in, doesn't even need approvals. But you don't want to track that in Sage HRMS. You wouldn't add custom detail fields for that. In that case, you can use our own user-defined fields, and that data will end up stored in the HR Actions SQL database, and you can report on that as well with, say, Excel or Crystal reports. We also have a really robust question object. This is typically used for performance management, performance appraisals, goal setting, and it has questions and comments and employee comments, manager comments, ratings, and so on. I'll show you an example of one of those today. So you put all that at the top of the form. You can put dates. You can put up to 5 places for people to attach files. At the bottom, you put in the default routing. Again, managers, HR folks, executives, or named approvers. You determine who can get access to the form based on where they sit in the organization, their roles, or even a range of dates. And if you want, you can set up conditional routing rules, what we call strategic workflow. In today's demo environment, I have a rule in place that says any form that triggers a raise more than 10% requires executive sign-off. So no matter what the form is, no matter what routing slip you have at the bottom, if the end result of that form would trigger a raise more than 10%, HR Actions is going to look at that routing slip, and if there's not an executive on there, it's going to add one. So that's just an example of the kind of rule you could put in to make sure that your forms are routed to the right folks, especially in those kind of exception conditions. Because you can use any of the fields in HRMS, including custom details, excluding benefits, it means you really can cover the entire employment life cycle. We ship with about 40 or more forms out of the box. You can use them as is, ignore them, delete them, copy them, and use them as a starting point, edit them, whatever you'd like. From an example standpoint, from pre-employment and onboarding, you can have a rec to hire form. You could also have a new hire form and a rehire form. In fact, the new hire form is smart. If somebody's name is on it who's already in Sage HRMS, we automatically make it a rehire form. With the addition of a little plug-in, so a little extra on top of HR Actions, we can go paperless with W-4s at the federal level and also for the states. We also have paperless I-9s. From an employee self-service perspective, you might make forms available that let somebody change their personal details, put in a forwarding address, maybe sick time, do a FEMLA, leave of absence request. And say from a manager or HR perspective, you might have forms, say, for a pay rate change, a transfer, promotion, file an OSHA incident, FEMLA, maybe retire, terminate someone, and so on. You'll notice that arrow that says goal setting and performance appraisal spans both the employee and the manager columns. It's really up to you how you'd like to do, say, performance appraisal. Does the manager do it alone and they're done? Does the manager do it? Then it goes to the employee for a self-review. Maybe they volley back and forth, and then it starts to route. Or maybe the employee starts the process, then it goes to the manager, and so on. We support all those combinations, so it's up to you who really participates in goal setting and performance appraisal. So with that, let's go ahead and actually look at the software. So Linda, while I think your microphone's open, do you have employee self-service?
No, we don't.
So I'll demo a little bit of both today. HR Actions does have its own web-based interface. So if you don't have ESS, you can still get to HR Actions. If you do have ESS, Employee Self-Service, it plugs right in there. So I'll show a little bit of both because I know some of you have ESS and some don't. So this way we'll do the mix. So I'm going to bring up ESS, and I'm going to log in as John Wayne. He's a supervisor in our organization. And if you have ESS, this should look very familiar, of course, the home page with your time off summary and compensation and benefits and all that jazz. And you'll see that we've added 2 items over here, My Action Items and HR Actions. Now, in the real world, I'd probably call this Forms instead of HR Actions, but for demo purposes, we like to name it the same as the module. So I'm going to start with this My Action Items. Now, this piece here, this My Action Items, is only available if you have ESS. But it's an easy way for me to show a list of forms. And I think for Avery, for your case, for onboarding, this would be how you might get this done using ESS. What this particular add-on does is it allows you to take any number of HR Actions forms and put them in a list and give the list a name. So you can see here I have, it looks like 8 forms in a list called onboarding, one in a list called performance review, and 3 in one called a to-do list. So you can put as many forms as you like in a list, give the list a name. Then you set 2 criteria. When should the form show up in the list, and when should the whole list show up? So in this onboarding list, I actually have maybe half a dozen W-4s, but the only one that shows up is the one where this employee lives. So that's an example of certain forms aren't showing up even though they're part of that list. The whole onboarding list might be set up to just show up, say, if a person's start date is within 30 days. The cool thing about this is you're giving the right forms to the right person at the right time. From an onboarding perspective, I have some examples here. The first one is a data confirmation form. So I'm going to go ahead and hit Create. This list just makes it very easy for you to basically assign a list of forms to an employee or a new hire. So when I hit Create, the form pops up. All of our forms look about the same. There's a logo in the upper left, title across the top, print button. Now we do encourage you to go paperless, but sometimes you'll want to print this maybe to a paper because you're going on an airplane without Wi-Fi. Maybe you want to print it to PDF so you can email it to someone outside your organization. Place for instructions. Then this blue stripe is the form header. Oh, looks like I clicked off that. The blue stripe is the form header. It sort of appears at the top of every form. It has the employee's name, their ID, their division, department, location, and so on. Next would be a place for dates, like today's date and the effective date. Now that's pretty cool because that effective date lets you put in forms that don't have to take effect till the future. Now we know Sage HRMS is not a future dated system. So the way this works is we let you capture all the data on the form with an effective date, but we won't update Sage HRMS until that date it comes. From a new hire perspective, it means you could hire folks right now. Let's say you hired me. You'd say, hey, Joe, it's the 24th of April. We'd love to have you on board, blah, 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 blah. Your start date's May 1st. Then you would put me in Sage HRMS with the minimum amount of data that you can, just name and a couple other things, that's it, and my date as starting May 1st. Once I'm in HRMS, even if I have a future start date, you can make ESS and HR actions available to me. And if you deploy this safely and securely over the web, like you would a banking application, it means before I even hit the office on day one, I could be doing all my onboarding forms. And you may want to compensate me for that. You could say, hey, Joe, if you show up May 1st and you have all your forms done, we'll give you a $100 bonus. So this way, you're not spending the person's first day reading a ton of stuff and signing stuff. It's all been done on their own time before they even hit your door. So we have a place for the effective date, the initiated date. If we had attachments, we could have up to 5 here, 5 places to put an attachment, PDF, Word doc, and so on. Place for comments. Now you see a 3-column layout. Labels on the left, which you control. Most of these map directly to Sage HRMS fields. Even if they connect to a Sage HRMS field, you might want to relabel it here just to make it more user-friendly. The value in Sage HRMS in the middle, and the blanks over on the right-hand side. So in my onboarding example, I could say, okay, hey, this is what we captured when we were working with you in the recruiting process. Now that you're going to start with us, could you please go in, make sure all this is correct, change anything that's necessary, and add the additional information, say, for emergency contacts. I'm going to save this and exit. So I'll save the draft and exit. I'm not going to finish it. Let's look at some of the other example forms. Here's what an I-9 might look like, or does look like, I should say. So again, very similar graphic, title, print button, instructions. Here we do have 5 attachments. In this case, we're using it to attach scans of the documents from lists A, B, and C. The employee fills out the top section. They stop. Then the preparer or translator. Then the employer goes ahead and verifies everything. And then it looks like a real I-9 down at the bottom. If you're using E-Verify, you could go enter this into E-Verify. We don't have a direct connection there. You still have to enter that. But when you get your approval authorization, you can fill it in right here. And again, I'm going to hit Save and Exit. And notice in my action item list, it's showing up as these 2 forms have been started. They're in draft mode, and now I'm just editing them. W-4 looks like this. There you can fill everything in up at the top. Let's say I want to withhold an additional $5.87. And if I hit Save and Continue, the form will update. And if I look down here at my W-4, there's my $5.87. A couple more examples. Now, all these forms are available even if you don't have ESS. Again, what the ESS feature does is give them to you in this nice little list. I know, Avery, you mentioned you had a ton of agreements. So let's look at a confidentiality agreement as an example. Pretty standard kind of form. Here's the body of your agreement. It's not too long, so I put it right on the form. The cool part is this electronic signature block. Now, it has lots of features, and I've turned them all on here. In the real world, you wouldn't use all of them. I just want you to just see the capabilities. So in order to be legal, an electronic signature has to capture identity, intent, and date. So for identity, we have you type in your name exactly. It has to match exactly the name they see up here. You can tell them that in the instructions. For intent, you can either check a box or you could select from a drop-down. Some attorneys feel that the drop-down shows a stronger level of intent because it's 2 clicks rather than 1. A checkbox is just 1 click. So you'd only put one of these on a form, not both. For identity, we have you type in the last 4 digits of your SOCH. I show the whole SOCH here. This is for demo purposes only because when I do this and I pretend to be different employees, I forget all their different SOCH numbers. So you'd never put that on the real form, and then you'd put the date. So when this is all done, then you have an electronic signature. So we did that for that confidentiality agreement. If you've got something longer, say an employee handbook, you probably don't want to put the whole thing in there. So you could just put a link to the handbook, could put a link to a YouTube video that supports it, things like that, and then again the electronic signature. I'm not going to even save this. I'm just going to go back and look at some other forms here. Direct deposit form, same thing. Here's an example. We show the picture of the check, and then you can add your distribution, and of course you can put as many as you'd like if you want to split the check across multiple routings. And again, this can all be happening even before the person's start date. If you want to give them access to this over the internet, they could get all this done at home. Now, what's cool here, this is what the employee sees. So the employee can actually see, hey, you know, this is what's going on. In the manager section, a manager would have a similar view that shows all of their direct reports, what lists they've been assigned to, and the status of all the forms in those lists. And of course, HR could have a similar view. So this way, if you are managing lots of lists of forms, this is an easy way to do it. Again, this little list part, though, is only available if you have ESS. The other thing we have in the list here is, say, an annual to-do list. Again, you have, say, a handbook acknowledgement and harassment policy, all that jazz. We used to have you just sign it when you started with the company. HRM is now saying to help minimize risk, you probably should have people renew those things every year. So yearly, you could assign them a list that says, here's all the things we need you to re-up. And they could get them all, and it's pretty easy to track. So there's an example of some of the forms that HR Actions has. And let's go ahead and look quickly at a performance review form. Well, no, let me come back. I'll come back to that. Let's look at the HR Actions dashboard. Now, this dashboard and everything you see under it is available even if you don't have self-service. So you see the different parts here, right? There's, in this case, there's 6 little blue boxes. Those are called web parts. They're going to show up depending on who you are when you're logged in. So in this case, I'm a manager. And I'm also someone called a universal initiator. It means that I have permission to fill out forms for people who don't report to me. In this case, I can fill out forms for anyone in my division. So when we look at the boxes here, I have a status box. This shows me the status of any forms that I've ever touched. Either I've initiated them or I was an approver. So if I click on this one being routed, I can see, okay, this was a pay change form for Brad Pitt. And it looks like it was signed by me, and then it was signed by Joe Black over in HR. And of course, I can click the magnifying glass and actually see the form and all the values and who it was routed to and when. So this way, if one of my folks comes, or if I'm curious and say, God, whatever happens to that form? I finished it, but I don't know where it is, I can check there. My actions is where I'll pick up forms for myself. So initiate a new action for yourself, and you can see all the forms that are available, say, for an employee. Manager actions is where we're going to go to get forms only available for managers. Administrative actions, in this case, it's all the forms for that I'm allowed to fill out for people in my division. As a manager, if I'm going on vacation, I can assign a delegate, and I can put in a name and a start and end date. They would get email notifications, as would I, anytime I have something to approve. And that way, if I'm away, they could get it, the email, and do my approval. I would still know they did it, though, because I get the same email. And then lastly, I have this little file cabinet where I can go back and look for any of the actions that I've ever been involved with and bring them up electronically. I can see that little routing slip. Let's go ahead and actually fill out a form. And maybe what I'll do here is try to remember this part, this middle section here, and you can see how it's sitting inside ESS. I'm going to log off, go over to our version of HR Actions without ESS, log in as the same person, and there you have the same dashboard. So Linda, you've got the same functionality without ESS. It just doesn't have that ESS wrapper. And you don't have the checklist part, right? The checklist part's only in ESS, but everything else is exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead and initiate a new action for someone I manage. I get a list of all my direct reports. Let's take Dan Rutherford and let's transfer him. So I pick transfer, hit submit. Again, if this were inside ESS, you'd have the ESS stuff down the left-hand side. But otherwise, everything's identical. We have the logo, the title, the print button, this form header at the top, place for dates, place for comments, the form, and the routing slip. And notice on this routing slip we have 3 folks. My manager, that's Grace, someone in HR, Joe Black, and Audrey, the training person. We only have 3 signatures. That's important to kind of remember. I like this 3-column layout because basically it's like before and after. What's in HRMS today is down the middle, and the blanks are over on the right. So right now Dan is in operations, in manufacturing department. He reports to me, where he's a foreman. He makes about $53K a year, and he has 3 direct reports, Sally, Paul, and Donna. Now there's lots of jobs Dan could do in manufacturing, so there's a list of all the jobs that are in manufacturing. I'm going to change the department, though, to quality assurance. The form is going to wake up, and now the list of jobs are only jobs in the quality assurance department. This is an example of a dynamic field. This field, job, depends on another field, department. So he's going to stay in San Francisco in quality assurance. He's not going to report to me. He's going to report to Sam Wilson. So let's go find Sam's exact name in HRMS. There it is, Sam Wilson. Start dates today. Imagine in our little sample that this is urgent. It has to be done today. The reason is a promotion. Well, this is actually the reason code list from Sage HRMS. And if you look at that list, I'll show it to you in a bit. It's huge. There's things like transfer, return from leave, go on military leave. I mean, it just goes on and on and on. But it doesn't make sense for a transfer form. I've just showed promotion, supervisor changed, and transfer. And that's because I know this is a transfer form. It's really how we came up with the name for HR Actions. Instead of building like one generic form, which is common in the paper world, we did it to save money when we had to print these things, that had everything on it. Build little forms that do specific actions, transfer someone, promote someone, give them a raise, and so on. That way the instructions can be really crisp. You can put the form fields on it that just make sense for that action. You can even make the defaults make sense for that action. That's where we came up with the name, HR Actions. So he's transferred. Let's put in a big raise, though, 15%. So when I hit 15 and leave the field, it updated unit pay, and the new annual pay now would be $61K. Notice 3 signatures. Let me hit save and continue. Remember I said I had a rule in place. Any raise over 10% requires executive sign-off. So sure enough, HR Actions added Shirley Douglas. She's an executive to the routing slip. And we put rules in where she should be added. So this way, Shirley doesn't have to see every transfer. She may not care about every transfer, but the one she does care about, raises over 10%, we're going to enforce that she's on that routing slip. So when you implement HR Actions, over time you might start to look at some of your routing slips and take away people that really only need to know in certain cases and put in rules for them. If you're using the alerts module, alerts remembers like, yoo-hoo, you can look at a database and say when you see something, do this. Well, if you have people on the routing slip that really aren't approvers, they're there just because they need to know it happened. Usually in an onboarding scenario, IT's on the list because they have to buy you a PC, and security's on the list to make you a badge and things like that. Take them off your paper checklists. Don't put them on forms as their approvers because they're not really approving something. If it's just need to know, set up an alert and send them an email when the form is complete. Here's what you need to know. Let's see. Oh, 3 direct reports, Sally, Paul, and Donna. Well, they're not going to go with Dan when Dan moves, so I'm going to reassign them to someone who's still in manufacturing, Clint Eastwood. So I'm done. I'm going to go down here and hit Initiate. That'll start the routing slip, and it's going to send email to Grace Lockhart. She's the first person on the list. So I hit Initiate. I get a confirmer. Nothing confidential in the confirmer. Basically, the same information shows up in the email to Grace. It says, Grace, you have a form to approve. It's a transfer for Dan Rutherford. Now, she'll have a link in her email that she can click and takes her right to the approval form. I'm not going to go through the email process. I'm going to go back. Let's switch back and do it in ESS. It's all really the same. But I'm going to log in as Grace Lockhart. Again, if she had used this through email, it would have had a link. It would have taken her right to the approval section. She would have had to log in, of course. But instead, I'll go to the dashboard. There's an item to approve. There it is, Dan Rutherford. And you can see here a little version of the routing slip, kind of a shorthand. O stands for operations. That's the chain of command. That's where we're sitting right now, the little hourglass. H means someone in HR. E means an executive. That's great. Shirley, and H, Audrey, our training person. So she can click Review, bring up the form. You'll notice in this case the form has fields on the right-hand side. It's editable. This is something you can turn on and off on a per-form basis. So in the paper world, if you just let your approvers say yes or no and that's it, then I would turn this off. But in the paper world, if you would let an approver change a value, cross something out, put in something new and initial it, then leave that on, because that's basically what this does. So Grace can look at this and say, yeah, this all looks good, except that raise. That's a little high. I'm going to make it 11%. So she changes it. She has a place to put in a comment. Looks good, but I lowered the raise a bit. Doesn't really matter what she puts in the comment because we're going to capture this in an audit trail and note that she changed the form and the date and the time and so on. She's going to hit approve. It's going to send email to the next person on the slip, Joe Black. And then Joe's going to have a link where he could click and log in and do the same thing. Let's jump now. Let's look at what this is like from an HR perspective. And we're going to log into a different website now. This is the HR Actions Administration screen. And I'm going to log in as Veronica Bell, the head of HR. Off the bat, you'll notice this is very different. This isn't ESS. This isn't the end user experience. This is for administrators, typically just HR folks. You can see there's a little dashboard up here. It says that there's one active action. There's one action routing right now. There's 90 done in the file cabinet. There's 8 ready for HR to save over to Sage HRMS. An administrator can do things like change the color of the application, change the default amount of time someone has to approve a form. If they don't get it done by then, we'll skip them and go to the next person so it doesn't get stuck. You can override this on a per form basis. She can write business rules like I have about the raise needing an executive sign-off. She can look at all the forms we have and make new ones and copy them and delete them and edit them and so on. Set up those special folks, universal initiators, like John Wayne can fill out forms for anyone in his division. Veronica, the head of HR, can fill out any form for any employee at the employer level and below. You can even manage the delegates. So you could look and say, oh, I don't want her to be that person's delegate. Let me change it. Maybe you have an employee hit the lottery. They're not coming in tomorrow, so you need to put a delegate in for them. But the important thing here is the dashboard. So if we click on active, there's our active forms, forms actually routing. We only have one right now. It's Dan's transfer. We can see exactly where it is in the routing slip, right? His manager has approved it, green check. It's waiting on Joe here in HR. Now I can audit it with the little binoculars. Remember I said this was important. It had to get done today. I know this is on the CEO's radar. So let's look at it and just see what's going on with this form. And I can see a new field, comp ratio. Comp ratio wasn't on the form when we filled it out. It's actually there all along, but it's marked hidden. Only HR can see this field. So you could have fields on a form that only HR can see or change. So I can look at all this and say, yep, this all looks good. Yeah, it has to happen today. Payroll can be effective today. And oh no, look at this annual review. That's all messed up. That should be a big promotion. Maybe 3 months is our policy. So I'm going to change this to 7/24/2015. And I'll make a note down here. Oh, it looks like Grace went in. She didn't like that raise and lowered it a bit. That impacted annual pay and so on. So there's the little audit trail. I'm going to put here fixed a bad date. Hit save. This form is still routing. We didn't interrupt the routing at all, but the next person who looks at it will actually see the correct date there. This is really set up for you to fix the clerical errors that you sometimes can't capture till the very end of the process. You don't even get to see the form till the end. Now we could do it right in the middle. Now if the CEO called and said, hey, what's going on with Dan's transfer? I need this to happen today. I can look at it and see the little routing slip and say, well, his managers approved it. It's sitting here waiting for Joe in HR. Oh, he sits right next to me. I can go tell him. That's no problem at all. Then it goes to Shirley. Oh, yeah, that's because the raise was over 10%. And then Audrey in training. And the CEO could say, hey, forget it. Forget it. That's crazy. Shirley's left for the weekend. She's at her lake house. So this has my approval. Just put it through. Well, that's where those operations buttons come into play. We could cancel the form completely with the red X. We could skip one approver at a time, or we could just skip them all. If we skip them all and say this is approved, we have to give a reason. CEO called and said to do it, has her approval. Shirley is already gone for the week. So I hit approve, and we no longer have anything active or routing. It's actually moved over to pending. Think of pending as the inbox where your paper forms are likely to go today. So we've got a whole bunch of them in there. Right at the top is our form for Dan. Of course, we could view it. We could still cancel it. We could still make changes to it. But we just looked at it. We know it's good. So I'm going to hit save. That one click just saved it over to Sage HRMS. One more click created history, and I'm done. This would be the same as if that paper form came in, and then you went over, logged into Sage HRMS's FAT client, searched for Dan Rutherford, made changes to his job, to his pay. Then you'd have to search for his 3 direct reports, reassign them to the new supervisor, then get up and go file the piece of paper. We did it all. And if we want to check that electronic file cabinet, we have a little search capability up here. I could say, you know, I'd like to see everything we've ever done for Dan Rutherford since we started using HR Actions. So let me just fill in his name, hit search, and basically there's his online personnel file. A transfer, a performance appraisal, his confidentiality agreement, and so on. Since all of this is stored in a database, it makes it pretty easy to research or report with Crystal Reports or Excel. And of course, you can search all kinds of ways easier than you could through a paper file. It'd be real easy for me to say, you know, I'd like to see all the transfers that we've ever done. And so I can just pick the name of the form and hit search. And in essence now, it's just gone through everybody's personnel file and found 3 different people had transfer forms. So you'd have to rifle through all those files by hand. This way you can search by who filled out the form, the type of form, the dates, who it was for, and so on. Should you ever get audited, say from a payroll perspective, just give the auditor a login and password. They can find any of the forms. They can look at the audit trail. You're good to go. Let's see what it's like to edit or change a form. I'm going to go over here to our form catalog. You can see all of our example forms. Let's just edit our transfer form. Editing is the same as building a new form. Either way, you're in an 8-step wizard. Step 1, you give the form a name. Fill in the instructions that you'd like to see at the top, any notes for the approvers, that footer, and so on. You can check options. Can this be initiated by employees? Is it for supervisors only? Can people like universal initiators do it as well? Do you want to allow approvers to edit the form? That's how Grace changed that raise amount. It's all happening in step 1. In step 2, you're putting in dates and file attachments. Let's add a file here. I'm going to check the box, give it a name. How about letter of support from a customer? And if this attachment were required, I could just check the box. I'll leave it as optional. So now we've added an attachment field. Step 3, this is sort of the magic of HR Actions. This is every field in Sage HRMS except for benefits, including custom details, all grouped the way you're used to seeing them grouped as the panels in Sage HRMS. And if you want to add a field to the form, we just pick it. So I'm going to add a bonus field. Since we know it's a transfer form, let's be specific. One-time transfer bonus. And of course, I can make that bonus optional, required, read-only, or for HRIs only. I'm going to leave it as normal, which is optional. And I'm going to check the box blank. Blank means that if it's blank, put in a 0. In other words, they don't have to put in a 0. We'll do it for them. Step 4 is setting up some of your defaults. And remember, our reason list only had 3 things, which was great. If you're curious, there's what the real reason list looks like in Sage HRMS. Adjustment, project ended, joined the military, deceased, reduction in hours, I mean, all kinds of reasons. They don't make sense for a transfer form, so you just pick the ones you want. Step 5, how do we handle that little multi-row table that had Dan's 3 direct reports? And it showed that he was the supervisor, and I let people edit that so that they could change that. These are the user-defined fields. We have text boxes, drop-downs, check boxes, dates, and so on. So if you want to put fields on a form that you don't capture in Sage HRMS, this is the place to do it. Great for a little employee survey kind of thing. Step 7, put the fields in order. Let me take our transfer bonus and drop it down here by annual pay. Step 8, who has to approve it? In this case, we had 1 manager in the chain of command, no executives, 1 HR person, and Audrey in training. So we had 3 signatures on the routing slip. How long do they have to approve it? 72 hours. When is this form available? Here it is with the date range. And if you need to do any customizations, we have 8 hooks where you can attach SQL custom stored procedures that are triggered after a form is created, after it's approved, after it's saved, and so on. We're done. We might want to change who can access this form. We just pick the org levels right out of your org tree. Maybe we want to put in a new business rule. We could say if, we could use nots and parens, but we could say if the new value, you could use the current value, you could use the delta. I'm going to say if the new value of bonus amount is greater than, I don't know, $1,500, then our policy says 2 managers have to approve it. And that rule is for our entire organization. Let's say we had a huge bonus, though. If the new value of bonus amount is greater than $5,000, be a nice bonus, then we're going to say that that takes an executive. And it's for my whole organization. So we're all done. We added an attachment, we added a bonus, we put in some business rules. Let's go see what that's like from an end user perspective. I'm going to go back to self-service, but we could also do it through our web-based interface. Bring up HR Actions dashboard. I'm logged in as a supervisor, so I'm going to initiate a new action. Let's look at that transfer form. Well, first thing is, notice Dan is not a list of my employees anymore because Dan doesn't work for me. I've transferred him. We've updated Sage HRMS. We're all done. So let's look at Clint. And let's bring up that transfer form. I just want to show you that the new fields are there. Sure enough, there's the ability to add a file, letter from customer. If we click add, we can browse. to any file on our network, and then we could go ahead and upload that file. So there's where we can do our attachments. And we should have a new field here, one-time transfer bonus. There it is. So that gives you an idea of how easy it is to edit a form. Lastly, let's just take a quick look at a performance appraisal form. We have a whole webinar just on performance appraisals, but I'm going to show you what a form looks like. Let's do one that has both a manager performance appraisal and a self-appraisal. I hit submit. Performance appraisal forms look the same, right? Graphic, title, print, header, comments. You can put fields from Sage HRMS. There's 3 that kind of make sense, right? Type of evaluation and time for the next eval. You could put compensation on here too if you want to tie pay and performance. Beyond that, performance appraisal or goal setting forms can have sections. I set it up so a section is a black stripe. You can have up to 20. I've got 3 on here. The competencies, goals, comments. Within a section, you can have instructions. And then you've got questions. You have 80 questions, up to 80 questions you can sprinkle in those 20 sections. A question could be fixed. In other words, there it is right there. This text was put in when the form was created. It could have a question that automatically carried in from your goals. The question could be editable so that a supervisor, the manager, or both could write their own question. The question might come in based on the person's role in the organization, so you can do job-specific questions if you have job descriptions and stuff. Question could even be blank. That's the case here. There's actually no text for the question, just a big comment box. So lots of combinations of questions there. When you put in a question, you can check boxes to say, do you want comment areas? Do you need a comment area for the manager, for the employee, both or none? Do you want a rating scale for the manager, the employee, both or none? If you put in a rating scale, do you want to include the does not apply choice or not applicable choice? I don't seem to have one of those here. So lots of combinations. When you click to put in a comment, you get an editor with spell check, and you can copy paste from Word, and don't worry about the size of the box. It grows when you type. So in this case, the manager does their review, and they're going to say that this employee was, kind of okay, fully effective, but not great. Maybe needs a little improvement down here. Of course, you could fill in the actual text and the goals. I'm just trying to get something in there quick so that when I hit save, you can see that it starts to calculate the score. We do an average per section. You can also put a weight on a question. We do a weighted average. And you put the values next to those terms that are in your rating or Likert scale. So you set up the scale, the terms, and the values. We'll do the math. If I were all done here, I could fill in my comments and stuff. When I'm all done, I could say click send to employee. It would go to the employee. They could do their part. Then it could go back to me. We could go back and forth till I hit initiate, and it'll start the routing process. So there's a quick example of a performance appraisal form. Goal forms are similar. Hopefully this has given you a pretty good idea of how easy it is to go paperless with Sage HRMS HR Actions. It's pretty easy to use. It's got a web-based interface like you saw, where managers and employees pick up and use forms. Also a web-based interface where the HR administrator manages the whole application and the process. Forms are pretty advanced. One field can depend on another, like you saw, job depended on department. You can have up to 5 attachments per form. And you can strategically route the document based on your business rules. Remember, we added an executive when the raise was over 10%. From an admin perspective, you have real-time visibility into the whole process. You can control the workflow for any form. Every form has a detailed audit trail. One mouse click updates Sage HRMS, of course creating history if necessary, and all the forms are available in that online personnel file. It's pretty easy to get started. You purchase software and maintenance from Dresser. It's fixed fee based on the number of employees. So it doesn't matter how many forms you have. It's totally based on your employee license count. Implementation follows an 8-phase project plan. Typically takes 8 weeks. It's done remote. You have a workbook. You do your homework. We work with you. Then we come back. We move to the next section and so on until we get through all 8 weeks. We can do it quicker than 8 weeks, but that's about the right time given you probably have to do your real job while you're implementing HR Actions. But if you can give us more time per week, we can certainly do it faster. Once it's implemented, there's no programming to create or edit forms or to set up those strategic routing rules. We found that it really does streamline the delivery of HR services over the web. Users find it a lot easier to submit electronic forms rather than paper forms. Depending on your culture, it might fit the culture better. If you're in a white-collar industry, people are going to think you're crazy if you're still giving them paper forms. Users make less errors because the fields kind of limit their choices and kind of force them down the path of making good choices. Better data on the form means that HR and payroll can typically process things more quickly. Make a change to the form like we did today, and it's immediately available to the organization. We're going to be consistent, right? We're always going to make sure that folks have access to the right forms, that they're routed appropriately, and that we enforce your business policies so that if you've got a policy, a raise requires executive sign-off, we're going to apply that consistently across the board. Forms are all approved digitally, electronically, right? Web notification via email, and then they hit approve, and we track all that in the audit trail. Increases productivity by eliminating paper forms and increasing transaction throughput, because you don't have to type all this stuff in anymore. Just one click does it. And as you could see, you could automate the performance appraisal process, I-9, W-4, even the onboarding process, even let people fill out forms before they actually start. You can monitor forms throughout the whole process, control the flow at any time. The personnel file is always available with their attachments, and you always have that detailed audit trail. If you're all about automation, which I am, that's like my thing, is getting software to talk to one another, we have some other gizmos that you might be interested in. We do have an applicant to employee gizmo. Plugin is what we call them. You can see them at Dresser's website. So if you're using Cyber Recruiter or really any applicant tracking system, we can take the data from that and push it right into a new hire form in HR Actions. And then that new hire form, you don't have to type it all in. It's the information transferred right over, and it's the first form in their online personnel file. From a payroll and tax perspective, we have a great time import tool that actually gives you all the errors you might have in your import file up front. You don't run it, get an error, stop, run it again, fix it, then go run it and get a little further and stop, fix it and go a little further. And we do it all up front. We have a great garnishment manager, and you can always outsource your tax filing. From an integration standpoint, Active Directory Conduit. So if you use Active Directory at work, a key might be, hey, do you use Outlook? Click on your address book in Outlook, and you see the list of everybody in there. If you bring up an employee, so let's find one, like Cliff would be a good example. It should have their address and their department and their phone number and all that in there and who they report to and so on. If it doesn't, it means IT is not keeping the Active Directory address book up to date. We have a connector that connects Sage HRMS over to Active Directory, pretty inexpensive, and it just pushes all this data over. So whatever you change in HRMS, it's going to update in Active Directory, let you then have all this chain of command and see who reports to who and everything right in Active Directory. The cool thing is if you fire or terminate someone in Sage HRMS, we can automatically disable their Active Directory account. So you don't have to tell IT to turn off the account. It'll happen automatically. Distributed Information Services is sort of like Active Directory Conduit. If you think about Active Directory Conduit, it's a pipe that connects Sage HRMS to Active Directory. DIS is a similar pipe. It connects Sage HRMS, but the other end of the pipe is wide open. So if you have other applications in your environment that you typically have to update whenever you make changes in Sage HRMS or add people to and so on, as long as that has a programming interface, we might be able to directly connect it and automate that whole process. So there you have it in a nutshell, how to go paperless with Sage HRMS HR Actions, and specifically what the onboarding process could look like with ESS and that dynamic forms list, so that you can give a new hire a whole list of forms electronically, fill them out, track the status, and all that data flows right into HRMS without typing. Any questions?
None here, Joe. I thought you did a fantastic job. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Did it make sense, Avery, the whole onboarding checklist kind of thing?
No, it certainly did. And then in addition, towards the end, where you talked about a couple of the plugins that you had available, the ability to perhaps import the information directly from CyberRecruiter into those new hire forms was something that I wasn't expecting to see, but something that I could see as making great use of.
Yeah, what's really cool about that is there is a connector already, of course, from Cyber right into Sage HRMS. But when you funnel it through HR Actions, what that does is give you the ability to have a new hire form where you have a documented approval process. You know, who authorized the person to get hired. And then, of course, you know what I mean? So you don't have that when it just flows right into HRMS.
Well, let me ask you this. That prompts a question from us. We actually handle the approval process of the hiring of that employee, salary and all, through CyberRecruiter. So at the point in which we're ready to import the employee's information, all of that has been taken care of. But I guess the question here is, our normal process has us importing the candidate's information from CyberRecruiter into HRMS potentially by use of your plugin. Does it skip that step? Does it create an extra step for us? Can you kind of talk us through how the import process would work, seeing as we might be using two tools here?
It's kind of, there's lots of different ways to set it up. So I don't want to give, I'll give you what I typically see, but it doesn't mean that the real world. It means you could change it in your world. How's that? So what I typically see is you start with a rec to hire form in HR Actions. So that rec to hire form says, here's the position, here's the salary, here's the, yada, 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 yada. HR gets that rec to hire. You then post it in Cyber. You do all your recruiting and stuff in Cyber. You then say, done, we're done, we've got the candidate, this is it. Then that candidate pushes to a new hire form that pulled in that data both from Cyber and then from that rec to hire. So we typically start with, you have to approve the position and how much you're going to pay the person and all that jazz, or a range, depending on whatever you want to do. Then you do your recruiting. Then once you hire the candidate, that all flowed right into a new hire form. So you're still doing the same kind of process, I think, because somewhere along the line you've got somebody has to approve, yes, we can hire someone and here's what we can spend. We just are doing that before you even start the recruiting, typically.
Got it. All right, that works. Well, you just made my homework a little bit more difficult.
So, and we can always one-on-one, chat with you about your specific needs. And, if you want to send us your actual forms, we can see how they would transfer over to HR Actions. The big thing from people who do a lot of onboarding, I can typically take what I see as a paper onboarding checklist and eliminate it. Because usually that checklist is a combination of forms, which you saw that we can take care of. And then it's usually got a bunch of tell someone this person's coming, tell someone that happened, tell someone this, tell someone that. Well, if you use alerts, now you can automate all that.
Got it.
So you don't have to be tracking this on paper anymore. You may want a crystal report or something if you want to see the status of it as it's going, things like that. But it's a great way to get rid of those checklists.
No, it certainly does open up a world of possibilities to us, and thank you again.
Cool. Well, any questions, you know how to reach out to the folks at Dresser. You can always contact me, find me on LinkedIn. I'll be speaking at SHRM. And I think with that, we're probably good to go, don't you think, Lauren?
Absolutely. We are all set on my end. And Avery, yes, you can contact us here at Dresser if you have any questions, and we can assist you further.
Joe, Lauren, if I wanted a copy of this presentation, should I just reach out to you, Lauren?
Yep, I'll send that out. I have a recording of it and some PowerPoint slides.
Excellent. I appreciate it. And well, thank you both for your time this morning. Certainly looking forward to the